How's it going, my rye bread lovers? Hope you're having a great day so far. Welcome to episode number 5 of the rye bread series. Today we're making a nice light rye bread full of seeds, grated carrots and oats. So let's go to the kitchen and get started. This is the first freestanding rye loaf in the series, and it ended up looking pretty nice if I say so myself. It has a nice light flavor and texture. It is full of seeds and oats, and it's covered in oats too. And it contains an extra unique ingredient, grated carrots. And of course you can adjust this recipe to your liking. Use any seeds that you like. Cover the loaf in seeds instead of oats. Use some other vegetables like cabbage or grated beetroot or even fruit like grated apple. Play around with the proportion of rye flour to wheat flour. You really can't go wrong. If you make a mistake, the worst that will happen is that you learn something. But let's get on with it and let me show you how this loaf is made. Starting with the ingredients. We're going to use some white rye flour, whole grain rye flour, and some white wheat flour. It is the wheat flour that makes this bread nice and light, and it makes this dough a lot easier to work with. And you will see wheat flour mixed in rye bread recipes quite often. It does a great job at giving the dough structure, and it helps alleviate some of the effects of starch attack. Right, besides flour, we'll need some grated carrots, sunflower seeds, pumpkin seeds, linseeds, also known as flax seeds in America I think. We'll need some oats, some yeast, some salt, and we'll need more oats. Some of the oats will go inside the bread, the rest will be used for topping the bread. And of course, last but not least, we'll need some water to bring the dough together. Right, moving on to the equipment. We'll need a tray with some non-stick paper, we'll need a pan for toasting the seeds, and that is if you choose to toast the seeds. We'll need a bowl for mixing our dough in, we'll need scales, a dough scraper, a temperature probe, and a spray bottle of water would come in really handy. I will use it for making the oats stick to the loaf, and I'll also use it to spray the loaf before it goes in the oven. It will help it expand a bit better, but you can certainly survive without this item. You can just brush the loaf with water. And you can certainly use different steaming methods for baking. You can find a full video about that in the Principles of Baking playlist. Okay, with all that out of the way, let's start the process. First things first, let's toast the seeds. In a pan, combine the pumpkin seeds, the linseeds, the sunflower seeds, and chuck the oats in there as well, why not? Place the pan on high heat and toast the mix for around 4 minutes. Toss it around occasionally so it doesn't burn. The only reason for toasting is to bring out more flavor out of the mix of oats and seeds. You can definitely skip this step, it's not essential. We'll use this mix to make a scald. So once it's all toasted, pour it in a bowl, add the salt and some boiling water. This will hydrate the seeds and oats, so we don't end up with dry seeds inside our loaf. I'm making this at around the same time I'm making the pre-ferment, so technically I could have just used cold water. If you're going to make your pre-ferment first, leave it to ferment and then later make the scald, then you can use hot water. In fact, technically, it's a scald if you use hot water, and it's a soaker if you use cold water. And of course you can find detailed videos about scalds and soakers in the Principles of Baking playlist. Right, let's move on to making the pre-ferment. I want it to ferment slowly for around 12 to 16 hours. But my kitchen is pretty warm, at around 26 degrees Celsius or 79 degrees Fahrenheit. So I'm using cool water to prevent the pre-ferment from over-fermenting during this time. Pour the water into a small bowl, add a couple of small pinches of yeast, or 1 large pinch of yeast. Don't worry too much about the exact weights here. Your scales probably wouldn't pick this up anyway. Moving on, add the white rye flour, then mix it all until there's no more dry flour left. If you have a sourdough starter, then you can make a leaven out of this rye flour instead of making a yeasted pre-ferment. But on the next day, add yeast to the recipe to make it rise faster. The starter will add the flavor and acidity, and the yeast will make it rise. Okay, once you have both the mixes ready, leave them to soak and ferment for 12 to 16 hours. You want your pre-ferment or your leaven to puff up, double in size, and be nice and bubbly. And this looks just about right, so we can continue by making our dough. But if you're not ready at this point, you can always place this in the fridge, then come back and use it later. But I'm ready right now, so I'm going to continue by making the final dough. Add the remaining water to the seed and oat mix. Then add the yeast and the carrots, and give it all a good mix. Follow that by the pre-ferment, mix again, then add the whole grain rye flour, and mix one more time. And finally, add the white wheat flour, grab your dough scraper, and mix it to the dough. Mix until there's no dry flour left. When you're not kneading the bread dough, it is important to mix the ingredients in stages. This ensures that all the ingredients are distributed evenly throughout the dough, and it's also easier. A quick word on temperature control here. At this point, my kitchen was slightly cooler, so I used all my ingredients at room temperature. If it had been still very hot like on the previous day when I made my pre-ferment, I would have used cold water in the final mix. If you want to see a detailed video about no-knead bread dough temperature control, You can also find that in the Principles of Baking playlist. Okay, the dough is fully mixed. I'm going to place it in a clean bowl and take the temperature just for reference. It turned out at around 23.5 degrees Celsius or 74 degrees Fahrenheit. At this temperature, bulk fermentation will take around 2 hours. You know it's done when the dough is doubled in size, and this one has puffed up beautifully. After bulk fermentation, we can move on straight to final shaping, and it's going to be slightly different than usual. We're not going to flatten it or roll it up, simply dust the dough with flour, because it is quite sticky still, tip it out on the table, then kind of lightly knead it and press it to degas it, and lastly, roll it into an oblong loaf shape. Of course, you can also make a round loaf if you want to. The next step is to cover it with oats. If you have a spray bottle, spray down the loaf with water. If you don't have a spray bottle, you can use a brush, or you can just wet your hand and rub the loaf with water that way, or whatever you decide to do. The next step is to roll the loaf in oats. You want to try and cover the whole surface of it. If the oats are not sticking to a part of it, then use some more water. But when you're done, clean down the mess. Place your loaf on a non-stick paper lined baking tray. This time I decided to score the loaf before final proofing, and it is because it's covered in oats. And if I tried to score it later, once it's puffed up and full of gas, quite fragile, the oats may get in the way and I might end up deflating the loaf or distorting its shape. Okay, we are ready for the final proof. Cover it and leave it to rise for 40 to 50 minutes. During this time, preheat the oven, nice and hot, 250 degrees Celsius, fan on, and that is 480 Fahrenheit. Once the loaf has puffed up nice and big, there's only one thing we need to do before baking, that is spray down with water. This will not only make it rise better, but will also prevent the oats from darkening too much during the long baking time. Here's a relatively large loaf, so it'll take some time to bake, around 50 to 60 minutes. Once you place it in the oven, turn down the temperature to 190 degrees Celsius or 375 Fahrenheit. If you're unsure of the doneness of your bread, pull it out of the oven and take its temperature. If it reads above 94 degrees Celsius or 200 degrees Fahrenheit, it is ready. Unlike other rye breads, this one does not need to mature for 24 hours before you can slice it. Just leave it to cool down and then you can eat it. I still left mine to rest for 24 hours, and to make it stay softer, I wrapped it up in a tea towel whilst it was still warm. But there you have it, that's how you make a seeded carrot and oat rye bread. One thing I would suggest you do differently is to score the loaf just on the very surface. I cut mine quite deep, and it spread out a little bit more sideways than I wanted it to. But of course, that is just looks. It'll still taste the same no matter how you cut it. If you're interested in more rye bread recipes, head over to the rye bread playlist. It already has a few good recipes in it, and there'll be more coming very soon. And don't forget that you can share your bakes in our Flickr group, link down below. So what do you think of this recipe? Have you ever added grated vegetables to your bread dough? Let me know down in the comments. You want to see more videos like this one? Click over here. Subscribe to the channel, click right here. That's all I have for you today. Thanks so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.